To all my hustlers, dreamers, love dealers, I'm that kind of girl. Work hard, play hard, for my own heart, might just rule the world. I'm on fire, can you feel the heat? You can try to, but you can't stop me.
This is Marcy Burrows and Carol O'Savin hosting the Midlife Mavens podcast, where we chat candidly about sex, love, relationships, and life for women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. We're both psychologists who specialize in relationships and sexuality, but this isn't therapy. Thanks for joining us to discuss the ups and downs of life in the middle. We hope our conversations inspire and empower you.
A quick disclaimer. We're both psychologists who specialize in relationships and sexuality, but this isn't therapy. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional services from a psychologist or other qualified mental health professional. The use of any products or services purchased by you as a result of this podcast does not create a healthcare provider-patient relationship between you and any of the experts affiliated with this podcast. Let's get into today's episode.
All right. So today we're going to talk about dating in midlife. This should be a fun topic.
Because dating in and of itself is always such a fun endeavor for people. Yeah.
Sounds terrifying, doesn't it?
Dating in midlife.
So for me, the first thing I think about and that I hear a lot from clients who are single or unpartnered is kind of, where do you meet people at this age in life? When you're in your 20s and you're still have college friends or high school friends you're hanging out with, there just seems like more opportunities to meet people. So I don't know if you hear that from clients, that where do you meet people?
That's exactly what I was going to say. And especially if I hear that from my clients when they've relocated. And when you are single and you relocate at this stage of your life, it is harder to meet people. When you are in your teens and 20s, you're in a cohort. You're going to college and you've got a bunch of people that you started college with. You've gone to graduate school and you start graduate school at the same time with a bunch of people. When you're employed, when you're a single mom or a young mom, you're meeting people through your kids' activities or through work, those kinds of things, your coworkers. What I see happening for a lot of my clients is that they've either ended a relationship or they've been single for a really long time and they're getting promoted. So they're moving to a new location where they don't have any people. And because of their promotion, they can't be friendly with their coworkers because they might be the boss. And it's not so much that they have coworkers as they have employees. And they don't have kids. Many of them don't have kids. So they don't have those kind of natural avenues through which to meet people. So I hear that question a lot. Not only I don't know where to find a potential partner, but I don't know where to find friends in this new town. And that becomes a challenge.
Yeah. And I think there's two options. There's in real life, which how do you do that? Kind of like you're talking about. And then there's, of course, the online option, which I think is something a lot of people end up falling into doing because of what you're talking about. There's not a lot of real life places to meet people. And I think that got worse since the pandemic because a lot of people also work from home. So they're not out in the world a whole lot meeting people.
Right. And online dating has gotten kind of some bad rap, right? A number of my clients have been reluctant to do that. I will say when I moved to Flagstaff, I tried online dating. I don't know if you've ever done that. I don't know how you met your current partner, but when I moved, I was single when I moved to Flagstaff, where I currently live, and I tried online dating. Flagstaff is a relatively small community. I'm a lesbian, so that made the community even smaller, and it became quite challenging to meet anybody in that avenue. I ended up meeting the person I'm now married to through mutual friends.
Right,
But
which
if you
that's
don't,
how I'm go ahead.
that's how you met your partner as well?
Yeah, that's how I met my partner as well, through mutual friends. Yeah.
Which backs us up to one of the roadblocks that I've heard from a lot of my clients is, I'm an introvert. I don't know how to go make friends. Where am I supposed to meet people at this phase of my life if I don't have those natural avenues, work or my kids, if I don't have kids or my kids are grown and flown, or how do I make friends through whom I might meet a potential partner?
And that actually brings me to a topic that I'd written down in the last week for a possible topic for us, which is kind of building new hobbies in midlife, like starting new passions, doing things. And that's actually, I met my partner through a mutual friend, but it was a new mutual friend who I met from a hobby. So, I do think that there's this idea, and it's certainly with I play the drums, and I didn't start playing the drums until I was well into my 40s. And I always believed that, first of all, women don't play the drums. That's kind of a message that girls don't do that. So I played the flute as a kid because that was more of a girl instrument. But I always wanted to, so I started in my 40s. But it was kind of like, can you start something like that in your 40s? Can you, as a woman, can I play the drums? Like, lots of barriers. But so that's how I ended up meeting the friend who introduced me to my now current partner. So, I think taking that risk to say, well, the hell with those myths, and jump in and try something new.
I think that's really critical. The starting new hobbies, being willing to. The reality is, at this in this age range of our listeners, random people aren't just going to come knock on your door and say, "Hey, do you want to be my friend?" In all likelihood, we do have to put ourselves out there, and I know that it's hard. I'm an introvert. That's incredibly hard to do. I joke around that my favorite people that I met after I moved to this town, and this is true, are people I met hiking in the forest, which I was doing by myself with my very large dog, who would get a lot of attention from other people. And that's how I met the mutual friends who introduced me to the person that became my wife. And that is how my social circle in this community has grown. It wasn't through work. It wasn't through kids, because I don't have kids. It was through doing something that is hard for people to do. Or it wasn't hard for me to go hike my dog in the forest, but taking the risk to join a meetup group that was about hiking dogs, and joining the silent book club, and joining the sewing class at the Michaels fabric store. I like to do stuff like that. Those were risks where, if we don't do something different, doing what we've always done isn't getting us out on the dating circuit. So we've got to do something different.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think, going to activities in town, like when I was newly single, I would go to bingo and to trivia, and nights like that. I would have one friend that I would go to those things with, and we'd hang out and meet other people. And so I think doing different things that get you out in the community, even if you're introverted and it's out of your comfort zone, is a way to start expanding friends and meeting possible people to date or start new relationships with. And then that's the other piece. Like, do you date around, or are you the kind of person that wants to just jump right into a relationship? There's a lot of questions, I think, that are different at this phase of life than when you're younger. It means something really different to start dating. Do you introduce them to your kids? How fast do things move? I think there's a lot of factors that are different at this stage of life.
And we're going to do another episode talking more about some of the challenges of changing our relationship structures, deciding to move in, deciding to marry. Do we decide to move in? Do we decide to marry somebody at this age of our life? But I think those issues become relevant about, I hear from clients a lot, I'm getting older. I don't want to waste my time dating somebody for 5 years only to have that relationship not work out. And then I'm back in the dating pool 5 years older, and it's 5 years harder to find somebody to date. So I think there
Right.
is a question about how do you know that it's a good, healthy relationship? How fast do you move? What do you do about introducing them to your kids? You have
Mhm.
had children when you met your partner. So, what was your experience of that?
Well, I let them decide because it was very new. I met Ray earlier than I wanted to. I really wasn't in a space where I was ready to date, and the friend that introduced us was very persistent. And so really it was pretty early on after separating from my now ex-husband. And so one of my daughters didn't really want to meet Ray right away. She wasn't interested in meeting anybody that I was dating, and the other one was interested in meeting him. So, I kind of let them decide but they were in their late teens. So it
I
was a
would
bit different
ask
than if they
how
were younger. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna ask how old they were when that was happening, and I think it does make a difference. I've certainly supported clients who were single with young kids, 5, 6, 7, in that pre-adolescent age, and not wanting to run the risk of introducing them to a dating interest too soon if that relationship wasn't going to go anywhere. I have a client now who's a little bit younger than our targeted population for the podcast, but their partner is older and he has a teenage child and isn't willing to introduce my client to his daughter until they've been together for at least a year. And
Mhm.
I think that's in part so that he feels comfortable that this relationship is really going someplace and isn't going to break the child's heart if the relationship starts and then ends. Harder for
Mhm.
kids than for adults, theoretically.
Yeah. Yeah.
We wanted to briefly interrupt the episode today and remind you that Marcy and I are both psychologists and would be happy to consider working with you if it seemed like it would be helpful. If any of the content that we've talked about in any of our episodes brings up issues that you would like to explore with a psychologist, we want to make sure that you all have our contact information.
If you're interested in working with either one of us, we both offer 15-minute consultations to assess if it seems like would be a good fit for your therapeutic needs. You can go to my website, which is Marcy, Marci Burroughs, Burroughs, PhDCST.com, or Carol's website, which is drosabin.com, DROSABEN.com. We also have our websites in the YouTube channel notes for this episode. And now back to our episode. And I think there's a piece to it also of like, what are you looking for as you're starting to date? I certainly have some clients who are looking for companionship but aren't looking for a long-term relationship, and then some who are looking for a long-term relationship. And so how do you have those difficult conversations on the first few dates? Those are kind of challenging topics, but like you're saying, a lot of people also don't want to waste time if they are looking for a longer term relationship, dating somebody who may be looking for something more casual.
And that's one of both the positives and the negatives, I think, about online dating is that on most of the online dating sites that I'm familiar with through clients using them, you can identify I'm looking for a long-term relationship, I'm looking for a dating relationship, those kinds of things. But then I hear from clients that often those aren't accurate reflections always of what the person is looking for because they put on there what they think will get them more swipes in the right direction so that they can
Uh-huh.
get matched more with people that they can choose from. And then it becomes on the first date, are we talking about the longevity of this relationship? We don't even know if we're going to make it to a second date yet. So that becomes a challenge as well with the online dating. That's the the upside and the downside of the online dating sites.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's, that kind of speaks to how truthful people are and the safety aspect. First of all, just meeting somebody in person that you met with online, making sure that you're safe and people know where you're going to be and it's public, but getting scammed by somebody who really is not being truthful or, is got ill intent.
Yeah. Have you heard of there was an article written a while ago called The Torched Haystack or Torching the Haystack? Have you heard that phrase?
No.
So I read the article and I will look when we're done. I'll see if I can find it and maybe link to it in the show notes. But it was written by a woman about dating at this age of our lives. And what she talked about was the fastest way to find a needle in a haystack is to torch the haystack, because then the needle is all you have left. And so she has and I can't remember if it was, I want to say it was like 10 rules for how to proceed through I think it was specific to online dating, but I think a lot of it applied to dating in real life as well. But rules about like what needs to happen in pretty quick succession in the relationship so that you're not wasting time, so that you're basically torching the haystack metaphorically and getting rid of those bad actors that might not be a good fit for you in the online or in the dating space, and keeping the ones that are good. And it feels like there's a good risk of throwing away the possible good people in the dating pool, but her argument, if I'm recalling it correctly, is you're better off doing that than prolonging a not good relationship to no end.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
And
was an
then
interesting concept, torching the
yeah.
haystack.
Yeah. I like that. Being a sex therapist, I'm going to throw in the topic of sex with dating. So, at what point do you start having sex with somebody that you newly started dating? And how do you decide if you are just looking to hook up? Is that, something that you're on dating sites for, or that you want to meet people for? Or is it, again, a longer term thing that you're looking for? And making those decisions, STIs are on the rise in the population that our podcast targets. So that's another thing to think about. A lot of people think, well, I can't get pregnant, or, my partner can't get pregnant. I don't have to worry about birth control, but still have to worry about STIs. So it's another thing to kind of keep in mind.
So, yeah, it's important for women in our age range to remember that safer sex practices don't only protect us from pregnancy, they protect us, some of them, but also protect us from STIs. And that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Right. And our generation didn't really get a lot of sex ed growing up. So, all of a sudden we might be back out in the dating pool without that information and not really comfortable talking about those things, or talking about them even with our doctors. How do I have protection from this? What are the options out there now?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, important topics to discuss. We recorded the episode about the changes that we go through at this stage of our life related to sex and sexuality, and some of those issues will impact relationships and our comfort and interest in pursuing the sexual aspect of our relationships, not just the companionship aspect.
Yeah. Another topic that I guess we haven't covered is, and it sort of goes back to if you have kids to some extent, but not necessarily, when is it okay to start dating? How do people feel about when they start dating after, let's say, a divorce of a long-term marriage or death of a spouse? That's another issue. I was telling my story before. I felt like I started dating earlier than I was planning and than I was ready for. I was kind of thinking that Ray would end up being my rebound guy. So I didn't want to date him because he seemed awesome, and I didn't want him to be my rebound guy. So, those kinds of things. When are you ready to start dating? And certainly if you lost a spouse to death, when do you feel ready? And I think there's a lot of judgment people might get from society about when is it okay and when is it not okay. And how do you get to a place where you just feel comfortable doing what's right for you and your partner or possible partners, maybe any kids.
And I think there are different issues if you extend into the issue of widowhood that are different than when you're a single parent. And widows can also be single parents. So maybe there's some overlap, but the issue of just not wanting to be alone. If you've been partnered most of your adult life and are accustomed to having a partner to engage in activities with, people don't want to be alone often. And if they know somebody else who is also a widow, that can be an easy and relatively speedy connection. For my grandmother started dating a man and married him quickly after my grandfather died because she and my grandfather had been friends with him and his wife, who had died a year before my grandfather died. And they had been supports to each other during this very difficult time in their lives. So then, when they were both widows and friends, it was a natural connection for them to choose to marry. But that brought up some really hard feelings in some of the extended families about that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's a really similar story to my mom and stepfather, that they had spouses that were sick at the same time in a community of like 55 and older with a lot of activities. And so they would be at activities that their partners couldn't be at because they were sick, and they would play bridge together or whatever the activity was. They would be partners for that. And so it was really natural when their spouses both died to kind of connect after that. But it was hard that it was quick. So, yeah.
and I do think that can bring up the younger end of the spectrum when you've got kids and you're dating again is, when do you introduce them to a new partner? But at the older end of the spectrum, that brings up money and questions about the estate of the spouse who's died and how the kids feel about where that money's going and how those questions are being handled. So then it brings up a whole different set of issues that need to be addressed and discussed. And back to our
Right.
recurring issue of the importance of good communication to have these difficult conversations, good communication with your potential partner, and also good communication with your younger kids and older kids about respecting their father in this whole process. And
Right.
whew,
I actually had a conversation with my accountant recently who was just talking about getting his own will redone. He's an attorney and an accountant. And he said that he and his wife put in their wills that the other one would have, if they remarried, if one of them were to pass and the other one were to remarry, that they would have a prenup agreement so that the kids would be protected in terms of inheritance, that it would go to the kids versus going to the new spouse. And
that I
wouldn't-
think brings up the importance of having a will and having an estate plan that accounts for lots of those kinds of issues. In the networking group that I participate in here in town, the attorney in the group who does estate planning talked about that, talked about protecting assets when there's a divorce or when there's a death or those kinds of things. And those things start to be more important the older we get.
Absolutely. And I think we'll probably cover a little bit more of that in our next episode about dating structures too, because I think that is a big part of the decisions about how you structure your relationship. But I do think, kind of going back to widowhood too, that it's hard for, if you have the situation you were talking about where both people have lost a spouse, I think that's a little bit different. But if you have where one person has and one hasn't, I think it's challenging on both ends to have lost a spouse and trying to reconnect and the feelings that go along with that. And then also dating someone who's lost a spouse is a very different dynamic than dating someone who's gone through a divorce.
There's guilt that comes up on both sides of that. If I'm the person who's lost a spouse and I'm thinking about dating, am I trying to replace my former spouse? How does that work? How do you refer to them? There's the extended family issues, all of that sort of stuff. And if I'm the person
Yeah.
dating somebody who's lost a spouse, is there now three of you in a relationship? The spouse who's died, the dating partner, and you? It gets really complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. And I am in that situation, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail to respect privacy. But
Right.
but it is challenging, and we've got wonderful, supportive families all around. So we're very fortunate, but it also has a lot of challenges too.
If we're going to sum up, there are lots of issues to be considered when we're dating in this age range. And your current status in terms of, do you have kids? How old are your kids? What's your level of comfort with sex and sexual behavior, sexual activity? Are you new to your community along with being newly single and wanting to date again? Lots of issues to consider that can impact what might be the best option for you. And I think if I had to pick one tip or one piece of advice, it would be, I think dating in our midlife years requires us to be brave and courageous and do things different than maybe we did when we were younger. And that sometimes requires reaching in for an inner reserve that we maybe haven't had to tap into for a while, but is so important if you want to have a partner to share your life with, which I think is important for most people.
It can definitely require stepping out of your comfort zone and really kind of digging in deep to do that. Yeah.
I tell my clients, and it sort of becomes a joke because pretty early on with every client, they'll say something about what they've been doing, and I will say in my semi joking manner, how's that working for you? Usually I say that when it's not working particularly well, and they'll say, yeah, that's not working so good. Right. If it's not working, you probably got to do something different. And that's difficult. It brings a lot of people to therapy. I know I need to do something different, and I'm having a hard time doing it. Help me figure out why that is. That's a lot of the work that we do. But that's the key. You probably got to do something different.
I do think that's a really good point too, that if you're coming out of a relationship, especially in like a divorce situation, there may be some work that really needs to be done first so that you can have this relationship be a different relationship, whether that's some trauma work from some of the things that happened in the first relationship or even going back further to more primary relationships. But sometimes it's the opportunity to take a deep dive inward and start figuring out some different ways to do things.
I think there are always lessons to be learned from, even from those experiences in our lives that we would call a failure or weren't successful. You got fired from a job, you ended up in a divorce, whatever it is. Those are difficult and painful experiences. And there's probably lessons that can be learned. And if you can find those lessons, even in the pain, moving forward becomes in some ways an easier prospect because you've got the wisdom acquired from that painful experience to move forward with.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us on this episode. And we look forward to you joining us in the future as we make midlife your best life.
Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time. This has been Marcy Burrows and Carol O'Sabin with the Midlife Mavens podcast. As psychologists, we are big advocates for therapy. If anything in today's conversation left you feeling like there is more that you would like to explore, we encourage you to pursue therapy. In today's episode notes, we've listed links for several directories you could use to find a therapist who's a good fit for you. Thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you in a future episode. Be sure to visit our Midlife Mavens Facebook page to share your ideas about future conversations.